Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 12th Annual Qualitative Report Conference, our first Zoom production. I can see that I have my screen backwards. Normally the writing in my office is not reversed like that, so it's always interesting. But welcome, everybody. Adam Rosenthal is also joining me this morning. A lot of you know Adam via this numerous correspondence with you and getting this organized. So I want to thank Adam for that. And Adam, I know you're a man of few words. Would you like to say a few words?
I'll just echo what you said. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first virtual annual conference. And please feel free to reach out to me via email if you have any questions at tqr@nova.edu. I'd also like to let everybody know that there's going to be a moderator in each of the breakout rooms that are going to help folks just stay on time. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them as well. Thank you.
Okay. So the one thing I know I don't have to announce this year is where the bathrooms are in the auditorium. You should know where they are in your own home. So it's much less complicated for me this year. So we'll see how we can go with that. So Dr. Let's start again. Dr. Venus Evans Winters just joined us too. We're in if you're not familiar with this type of the Zoom, we are the panelists and participants. We can see everybody as far as the participants, and so the chat mode is in order, so you can ask questions and comments and so forth, and we will be trying to facilitate all those things. So just take just a couple of minutes. So today, this is a 3-day conference, and so you all should have your schedules. And the way it works is we have a number, like for example, the plenary this morning has its own Zoom room. And then each of our rooms during the day are Zoom rooms, and you can jump from room to room if you wish. And as Adam said, there's a moderator for each room. And like we've done in the past, there are either a series of papers during a particular time slot, or maybe there's a panel or a workshop. And so again, you can jump into the different rooms. All you have to do is keep your schedule at hand, and for each of those slots, there's a Zoom address, and you can use those. So today we have our plenary from 9 till 10. And then our first breakout sessions start at 10:15, and those are session A's. And you can see, Adam, I think there's 6 rooms at a time for each slot. Is that correct?
Yes, that's 6 rooms in each breakout session.
Okay, good. You tell I'm not very good with math. That's why I do qualitative research. I have to get the numbers from Adam with that. Then from 12:15 to 1:30, we have Dr. Stacy Pena from In Vivo giving a workshop on In Vivo. I think you probably have heard of that before. And each day we'll feature a different software package during the lunch break. And then we resume at 1:30 for breakout session B. There's a slight break between B and C, and then C starts at 3:50, and we wrap up at 5:40 today. So that's the first day, and so pretty much we'll go the same pattern. We start with an opening plenary to get the day going, and then we have a power lunch, although as you can tell, we're not serving lunch, so that's up to you. And then we will wrap up the day. The one that's a little bit different is tomorrow on Wednesday from 5:30 to 6:30, we have the TQR editorial board meeting, and you're all invited to be a part of that. It's about bringing our community together, talk about where the journal is going and our conference and those sorts of things. So again, you're all welcome. You don't have to be on the editorial board to join that meeting. So that's a little bit different. So Wednesday is a little bit longer than the other days. So Adam, did I miss anything?
Nope, I think you hit everything.
Okay, all right. Well, again, it's always kind of exciting. I see the numbers kind of popping up in terms of people joining us. So we're very pleased. We actually have, I believe this is close to being our largest attendance at a conference. So for one of our in 12 years. So we're really happy with that. Happy that you stick with our format with the Zoom this year. And hopefully, maybe we should have a contest, Adam, that we'll see how many times during the over and under of your mic is muted. Maybe we could keep a running tab on that to see how that goes. So I'm not sure. We'll see how that happens. So, well, I think I've done all of that. So let's go ahead and get started. It's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Venus Evans Williams. She's a senior researcher at the African American Policy Forum, a former professor of education and founder of Planet Venus Institute. She's also a clinical psychotherapist in private practice. Her research interests are educational policy analysis, racial trauma inside and outside of schools, and Black girls and women's psychosocial development across the African diaspora. Dr. Evans Winters is the author of Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, a mosaic for writing our daughter's body and teaching Black girls resilience in urban schools. She is co-editor of the books Black Feminism and Education, Black Women Speak Up, Back, and Out, celebrating 20 years of Black childhood, the Lauryn Hill Reader, and Reteaching Trayvon, Education for Racial Justice and Human Freedom. She's also the author of numerous academic journal articles and book chapters. This invitee to President Obama's special convening on the state of research on girls and women has served youth and young adults in the US, Ghana, West Africa, and South Africa. And today she's opening up the 12th annual conference with a keynote address, Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, Rights, Rituals, and Meaning Making in Front Porch Politics.
Thank you, Ron, for having me today and trusting me to open up the conference. Also, I would like to thank Adam. Adam, I'm sure I am your first Zoom diva. So usually if we were face to face, I'll be asking, where's my Starbucks coffee, right? Or when will my vegetarian lunch be here, right? Even though it's 9 o'clock in the morning. So there you go. So Adam, thank you for handling all of my affairs behind the scenes. And so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my keynote. I will be sharing my screen. And the way that this keynote is set up basically is more like a presentation / discussion of current politics around Black feminism and qualitative inquiry, and Black feminism and qualitative inquiry and the state of affairs today. As a part of this, in the spirit of qualitative inquiry, especially Black feminist qualitative inquiry, I'll be reading excerpts from my most recent book, which is Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, a mosaic for writing our daughter's body. And that's not a cheesy plug. It's actually simply a way to set the tone, how we can be in dialogue with text. And also, I'm literally like reading field notes for those of you who are students of ethnography, autoethnography, or BFQI, simply because I get a lot of questions, mostly from novice researchers or even tenure track professors who they want to understand more about the methodologies of what I call in this particular text, daughtering. And so I'll be providing some of those field notes as excerpts as a part of the discussion, and we can see how we can interweave what comes natural to us, not only as qualitative inquirers, but also as people who are part of an oral tradition, and those of us who have an intuitive leaning towards the written word as a part of spoken word. And so think of like hip hop and R&B as a part of this conversation. So again, thank you for having me here today. It's actually 8 o'clock in my time zone. So it's really, fascinating to be awake. This is probably the first time I've been to the conference opening on time and not rushing through the door at the last minute. Again, my name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters. I'm a senior researcher with the African American Policy Forum. And today I'll be speaking on the topic of BFQI, or Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, Rights, Rituals, and Meaning Making in Front Porch Politics. This is a good time for those of us who like to take notes about our writing. It's a good time, as I always tell my students, to start, just jotting. It's a good time to jot down and reflect on what you're going to hear today. As far as my background, because this is my first TQR convening, I probably should tell you a little bit about who I am for those of you who don't know, and I'll tell you who I'm becoming. As far as my life in the academy, I have a background in sociology, women and gender studies, and educational policy, and in the areas of sociology and anthropology of education. So my bachelor's is in sociology and women's studies, and also I have a master's in social work with a certification in school social work, and my doctorate is in actually educational policy analysis and educational policy studies, with a specialization in sociological and anthropological research methods. My background as far as teaching, most of my teaching for graduate students is in the area of critical race theory, critical race policy, Black feminist thought, and sociology of education. And I think that that's important to point out, because the one thing that I've found over, over the last decade or so is that for those of us who use qualitative research methods or have leanings towards qualitative research, we tend to be more interdisciplinary, and you will find us in different fields of study. I think it's taken for granted that we're only in education, or we're only in ethnic studies, or women's studies. But the truth is, we're a very interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary field. And so you're probably going to see this as a part of the Mosaic in Black feminism, or Black feminism qualitative inquiry. You're going to see these pieces coming together as I narrate. Also, which is really interesting for me, again, speaking to that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary background, I'm also a clinical psychotherapist in private practice. So I am a licensed school social worker, a licensed clinical social worker, and also a certified clinical trauma professional. And currently, mostly because of the dual pandemics of racism and COVID-19. My youngest client right now is actually 13, and my oldest client is 17. I see men, women, all genders. I see people in urban communities, rural communities, as well as suburban communities. And my clients, they range in their symptoms from mild depression all the way to serious mental health disorders, such as borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, addiction, etc. So with that said, you're going to hear a lot in my work, like this this fascination, if you will, with the psychosocial. And I know sometimes as qualitative research, or those of us who are interested in what qualitative researchers do, we think of relationships. We think about what we can actually observe. But I think that what we find in BFQI, that's short for Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry. That's what we use in the social media area. But what we'll find in BFQI is that in my front porch politics, in my daughtering as a methodology, we're always given attention as well to the mind. And I think that's why it's so important to have inner and intercultural dialogue and qualitative inquiry, because when you're studying, when you're investigating, when you're relating to and analyzing the other, like other people's ways of life, it's kind of difficult to understand how their mind is shaped by their social cultural reality, but also how their mind shapes their social cultural reality. I think that because many of us are so niched or pigeonholed, if you will, into certain disciplines, that we fail to understand how these overlapping modalities might inform how we do qualitative research. And so daughtering, I think, is unique as a BFQI framework, simply because I do have to deal with habits of the mind, because my research and my praxis occurs in real time. So I can't separate it from the work that I do as a research scholar, the work that I do as a clinician, nor can I separate it from the lived reality of living and walking and studying in a Black woman's body. So the thinking is a part of also this performance in order to exist. And it's the Black womanist theorist, Anna Julia Cooper, who is an activist and a philosopher in her own right. She once stated, only the Black woman can say, when and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence and without suing or special patronage, then and there the whole Negro race enters with me. And I like to use this statement as more of a setting a tone for me. It's a reminder for me that when I speak, I know that I am representing more than myself. Also, when I speak, I'm not speaking out of a space of violence or anger or resentment, but because that's the privilege, but I'm actually speaking and bringing into this space all of who I am as an individual and what it represents as far as collective wisdom for Black people and Black women in particular, and other women of color and Indigenous people. So what you see here on the screen is actually my sister, my brother, and me. So my sister is actually my younger sister. She's the one with the hearts on her shirt. And interestingly enough, my sister is younger than me, although she's taller than I am. And that's my older brother. And that's me, the girl with the all-white sweater on. And so I know what you all are thinking right now. Wow, Venus really grew into her bangs. Yeah, so in this picture, I think I was probably about 12, I'm guessing 12 years of age. And I think it's important, as I tell the youth scholars, the youth researchers who I work with doing YPAR work, always ask people who are teaching you or who you're learning with, where are you coming from? So what skin do you have in the game? So let me tell you all where I'm coming from. I was actually born on the south side of Chicago in Inglewood. Today, unfortunately, Inglewood is known as probably the worst place in the country to live. And it's also unfortunately known as one of the worst places to actually live as Black people in this country, in the United States. My mother had us, my brother and sister, at the age of 16, 17, and 18. And we grew up in a pretty, what I thought was a comfortable family. In fact, back then, I didn't even know that there was this thing called teen parents or adolescent mothers. I just knew that I was in an affirming household. And so with that said, where I'm coming from, when I talk about my research, when I'm interacting with my participants, and even in engaging in the analysis process, I can't, I can't leave behind the fact that I was born to a Black young mother, and also where I was born, because I bring all of that into my data. And I think in qualitative research, we need to be having more honest conversations about who we are when we enter the research process. Now, keep in mind that I know there's this thing called positionality, right? It's called positionality, and everybody's talking about it. It's the rave. But very rarely are we able to do this excavation of ourselves. I was just telling some young scholars who are part of a writing program that I facilitate. I was just explaining to them, it's easy for qualitative researchers to talk about everybody else, but rarely do we talk about ourselves. And I think there's this very voyeuristic nature to qualitative inquiry that of the last probably 5 years, I've been trying to combat, okay? And we're gonna talk more about that later in the presentation, but as far as where we're at as a discipline, this crisis of representation, what if we started to shift the conversation more into not me research or research all about me, but the decommodification of other people's stories? So what happens when we turn the lens on ourselves? What can that tell us about the state of qualitative research? So I should also say that, as I speak, I have to be open and honest. Now, when I was born, I survived the war on poverty, the war on drugs, and what I like to call the war on Black people. And so we had it tough. So we literally were experiencing throughout my teenage years, my adolescent years, the destruction of Black communities, Black families, and Black neighborhoods, and even Black schools at a time when we were just beginning to desegregate public education, in many of our urban communities. So, and now keep in mind, I said we were beginning to desegregate because there's this myth that the United States is an integrated society when it's actually not, and our public school systems are certainly not integrated. And at the time, it was beginning to be forcibly desegregated, we also saw this structural violence that began to rob us of true education, and education that was in the interest not only of democracy, but also in the interest of oppressed people, in particular Black people and people of African ancestry. And so I was immersed in this counterculture, like living on the south side of Chicago. So blaring out of our speakers, you can, I remember one time I walked into my brother's room, and I was fascinated when I heard NWA. And I said, whoa, I like this. And I remember it was interesting because my brother is like playing this out of a boombox, but he could only play the NWA album or any type of rap music, especially underground rap music, when my parents weren't in the house, And so, he would play that. But then at the same time, I had my other brother, the one that you saw on the picture there. So I have cousins too, and so I call my cousin sometimes my brother. But they would also listen to like Farrakhan, because that's Farrakhan in the Nation of Islam was a major part of Southside culture, even if that wasn't your primary religion. But at the same, so those are the contradictions. We're listening to gangster rap while also listening to this religious, leader in the community. But also at the same time, that my brother and him, they're listening to this very misogynist, hyper masculine, toxic masculine, group of artists. I'm also like listening to Queen Latifah and MC Light, and later on even TLC. And so again, while I'm feeling NWA and other underground rappers, I'm also listening to these very conscious rappers, including Public Enemy and KRS-One. And as a Black girl, I'm also being told to embrace my Black beauty and my Black sexuality, because I'm listening to people like Janet Jackson, people like Cyndi Lauper and Whitney Houston, right? And Madonna. So yes, there was a point in time when I actually thought that I was Cyndi Lauper. So there you go. That's a little bit about me. But we're also listening to people, other R&B music like Luther Vandross and people like that. So it's like this coming of age where I'm couched in these spaces of liminality, this counterculture, right? That's both uplifting racial conscious politics, while also deconstructing social structures, while also teaching us who we are as sexual beings. And all of this informs my pedagogy, but also how I think about what is the purpose of research? And not only what is the purpose of research, but how do we teach that in ethical and moral ways? And also, how do we think about how we know what we know? So that epistemology and all of this, right? Hip hop culture, R&B is all religious, minority groups, etc., is informing of how I think. And so here, I want to read a field note from out of the BFQI book. And this is actually my grandmother's house on the south side of Chicago. So this house is still standing. Now, what's interesting, if you've had the opportunity to read this text or hear me speak other places, you know that me and my brother, my sister, the three people you were introduced to on the first slide, we were in a house fire. We were in a house fire in that exact house. And I was looking at this image as I was preparing this talk, this conversation. And I thought, wow, I mean, it brings back so many emotions, mixed emotions. So if you look at that roof, me, my brother, sister, aunt, uncle, mom, we were all trapped in that house during the house fire. And so my brother actually broke through that top window that you see upstairs with his bare hand. Now, mind you, we're very close in age. So at the time I was 9 and he was only 10 and my younger sister was 8. And so he had to break through. And I don't know, those of you who were around in the 70s and the 80s, you know that we had these things called storm windows. So now I want you to imagine this. right? Imagine this and sit with this. Imagine a 9-year-old boy, 10-year-old boy, I should say, very skinny and frail, as you can see from our pictures, we're smaller, busting through that storm window glass and then encouraging his little sisters to climb out of that window. Well, what happened was, which I'm not sure comes through in the text because that's not the part that I wanted to reveal about myself so publicly and inscribed forever, ever, is that we had to sit on that roof until people figured out how to get us off the roof. And as you know, if you can listen to 911 is a joke, remember Public Enemy said that 911 is a joke. It's definitely a joke in Inglewood. And so let's just say the fire department took a lot of time to actually come and get us off that roof while people was telling us to jump. The fire department came later, but a neighbor did figure out how to climb up on the house and took each one of us down one by one. I think that's the exact definition of trauma. And by the way, my mother ended up passing away due to smoke inhalation as a result of that house catching on fire, which since then the front part has been somewhat remodeled. And if you look to the left of this image, in the back, you see a brown building for those of us who can still look at Zoom images at this point. And you will notice in that brown building, it looks like it's some type of basketball or hoop, something over there. Well, that alleyway has always been there, but that's actually the school where I went to. So imagine growing up on the south side of Chicago, and I could literally leave out the back door of my grandmother's house, and me and my brother and sister can walk through that alleyway. That's what it was called at the time. And we'll be at school in less than 3 or 4 minutes on a sunny day. And so anyhow, that's the front porch that I'm going to be speaking about in my first reading. And I think these details are important not to over share, but really to understand the emotionality in our research pursuits. And I want that. So how do you bring out this emotionality that people like NWA, Farrakhan, MC Lyte, and other hip hop artists and pop culture people at that time, even our religious leaders brought forth in us? How do we do that? So I'm going to read at this time from the text. My grandmother's house, which was the family's house, was right in the middle of the block. And my godmama's house was only 2 houses down. It placed me right in the center of grown folks' business when getting my hair done on the porch. Children made the distinction early on between grown folks' business and everybody else's business, because the grown-ups would simply say when we asked a question or commented out of turn, "Child, you better stay out of grown folk business." On the porch, while getting our heads did, the grown folk just talked at us or over us. They knew we were listening, but they also trusted that we were the keeper of the secrets. No matter what we heard come out of grown folks' mouths, us girls knew not to repeat it. Children were taught early not to be telling my business. Not telling folks personal or family business was a rule, not a written rule, but more like a moral code that, if broken, if only once, could lead to your body parts coming in contact with any available foreign object, including a hairbrush, a house shoe, a belt, a hanger, or a switch. Mama's or grandma's hands were also quick and convenient weapons of choice. Leaning back between your mama's legs or someone's mama's legs, that could be a godmother, a grandmother, or even a playmother. With your head pushed forward, head tilted slightly to the left or the right, the girl child learned a lot of life lessons by watching, all the while pretending not to watch and patiently listening. We were not deaf or dumb, but good actors. Maybe mimes. Sitting on the porch getting our hair did, we were rarely directly talked to unless we were told to do something. Put the top back on that grease. Go get the hairbrush. Go get my pocketbook. Bring me my cigarettes. You better put your scarf on tonight. On the porch, We learned our place in the world as girls and women, or other girls and women's places in the world, based on another girl's or woman's place in the world, which was often unveiled based on other women's comments, judgments, and experiences. And the conversations us children were privy to or not privy to, omissions and omissances in conversations, verbal and nonverbal body language, laughter, and sarcasm. God forbid you ever get caught watching or listening. Girl, what you looking at? Or cover up your ears, child. Or you better not be telling my business, were all indicators that even when you heard or saw life through a Black woman's world, you better act like you did not hear or see anything. In our interactions with other girls and women in the middle of the block, on those front porches, sitting between a woman's warm Black legs, we became witnesses to the covenant. So again, in that field note, I wanted to demonstrate in our inscriptions that we're doing this dance between the past and the present, or even predicting the future. So what might that look like in our methodological pursuits, but also what does that look like in our outcomes of our research or our performances? And in this piece, obviously, I'm talking about how the Black girl becomes a Black woman, and it's an ongoing process that's shared in relationship with other women, but also it's a very private and public affair. So early on, we are coming into who we are. So it's shaping our epistemology. Now, what's interesting for me is that, as like I mentioned, so my mother did pass away, and my brother and sister, all three of us ended up moving to the suburbs of Chicago with our extended families. Our aunt and uncle became our guardians. And so I also was raised with two other male cousins, and who I sometimes call my brothers, so you won't get confused. But anyhow, after our transition into the suburbs, that's when it was interesting, because the school was no longer a neighborhood school. It wasn't simply in your backyard. You know, I had, for the first time, I had white teachers before, but for the first time, all the teachers were white. And, you know, all the so-called smart students were white. Whereas where I went to school in the classroom, me and my siblings and cousins, and there were many of us, we were considered smart kids and good kids and from good families. And the school was a part of the larger community. But in the suburbs, that wasn't the case. We were very marginalized, if not terrorized by other students, by teachers, even you know, police officials and other white adults in the white community, suburban community at that time. But it taught, and I witnessed firsthand with this war on poverty and this war against Black people, even the ghettoization of Black suburban communities. Those of you who are in Florida, as you're familiar with the Trayvon Martin case, for example, I was very familiar with where that incident took place. I could picture it in my mind, you know, as this social critic, this qualitative researcher who's watching. I'm like, aha, I know that neighborhood that Trayvon was murdered in, simply because that was like the suburb where we grew up at. Yes, Black people were not allowed to maneuver alone after dark. They were always seen as these outsiders within that particular community, even though our parents owned the homes and, you know, paid mortgages and went to work in those communities just like everybody else. We were always outsiders. So I could understand, you know, Trayvon's, you know, surprised but not surprised that he was being accosted by this adult male at that time. And so I've seen these types of border crossings other places. And I would say that I would say it stood out for me the most, this distinction between who belonged and who didn't belong, and how it carries over into social science research, is when I went into college, when I entered the university. And so I was one of those people that I used college to escape, you know, the reality the terrorism that we were facing in our home communities. And I mean, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war against Black people. In the 90s, it was hard for us. So I said, you know what? For me, the path of less resistance would be college. And so when I went away to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, I entered as I said in one of the previous slides, I entered as a psychology major, and later as a sociology major. And the first thing I noticed is that there was these distinctions. Whiteness was in your face. Whiteness was in your face. So you enter these college campuses and you enter these sociology and psychology classrooms, there was this fascination with Black pathology. So all of the scientists, and I'm talking about some of the top, research scientists in the country, they were spending most of their time trying to figure out what was wrong with Black people. When I was coming from a family and a community where Black people weren't broken. And so we were being taught in many of our university studies and our so-called, research courses that one, Black families were destitute, that Black people somehow were cemented to the bottom of society, and it was the role of the scientists to figure out, how to, fix our problems. This type of victim blaming, methodologies and frameworks of study. And also, I noticed that everything was Eurocentric. So most of these stories were very Eurocentric. And so even when you think about our current research texts, they're still very Eurocentric. I dare to ask, even here at TQR, how many of you all are reading actual research texts, sociological texts, anthropological texts, political science texts, economics texts that are written from the perspective of Black people, whether that's a Black scholar or a Black community where the study is taking place. Very few of us were. And also there was this very Western canon, as if other, lands and people and knowledges did not exist outside of the West. And so that was a challenge. And also a lot of white privilege. And so everything, so when you think about when you enter university campuses, for example, not only are you're confronted with like geographical or environmental racism in the sense that these learning spaces on campuses are very segregated from other communities. And so if you look around most university campuses, just, within a 20-mile radius, you're probably going to bump into a low income community or a ghettoized community. So it's very segregated by race. Even the architecture and the monuments or statues, the people on the wall. So to this day, at the last institution I was at, for example, on the walls, you would see like these walls, and all the pictures were of these white, men. And I mean, like really white men with even like white hair that was just lined up. So you very rarely saw any images or any acknowledgements of the contributions of Black people, African people, or any people outside of, the West or North America. So imagine what does that do to the psyche? Like even our extracurricular activities were very segregated. And I mean racially segregated, culturally segregated, in the sense that it was usually trying to appeal to the taste or the aesthetics of white elitism or white middle class culture. Now, where I'm coming from, education was not seen as this very individual endeavor. In fact, it was a very familial experience. So meaning that if you asked a Black person or even a Latinx person, why do you want to go to school? Why do you want to get this degree? Many of us would say, well, I want to get this degree because I want to help my mama, buy a house. Or, they would say, well, I want to get this degree because I want to be a role model for my brothers and sisters. Well, and it's funny because being in academia now too, I know that a lot of advisors or college professors or people who are recruiting these young people into college, they're like, don't you want to go to college so you can make more money and so that you can leave this neighborhood or so that you can do better than your brother? And, so this very individualistic thing, in fact, I ran into this in some of my research where I would ask girls of color, why do you want to go to college, or why do you want to do well in school? And they would tell me the same thing. I want to help my grandmama, my mother, my aunt, etc. Or they would say, well, I do want to go to university, but I don't want to have to move 4 hours away and leave my mama behind. And so things like that. Education was always familial. It was also communal, right? So we were also usually developing our thinking, our ideas in relationship to other people who look like us, who speak like us, who worship like us, who talk like us, who live like us. When you think about Black education and these Black cultural ethos, it was also this commitment to transformation of the individual, spiritually speaking, but also of society. So we went to school because we did want to combat or fight and struggle against racism. We went to school because we did want to learn more about how to ethically fight against gender oppression within the Black community, but also outside the Black community. And we wanted to figure out how could we fight against white supremacy overall. And also education, learning, knowledge, wisdom, it was tied to something that was spiritual. I was just talking to a group yesterday, and for example, when I said, so how did you finally finish your dissertation? And one of the Black women, she said, oh, well, I prayed about it. I had my grandma, she laid hands on me. So there's still this type of spiritual connection. And I think about when Black people were dying and sacrificing their bodies, even their economic security, in order to secure education for themselves or their children. And so education is tied to something bigger than what's tangible, than the tangible, or some diploma or some degree or some type of, commodity. And so we have to start thinking about this in our qualitative pursuits as well. So again, research for who and research for what. And also, as Dr. Gloria Lansing Billings has pointed out, when you think about Black people's epistemology, there's also this idea of Ubuntu. Okay, so Ubuntu, that's actually a South African term, which is where I also studied to get more insight into this BFQI text. But it's this idea that, I know being a sociologist, coming out of sociology, Rene Descartes, everybody knows Rene Descartes. In fact, I hear qualitative research is cited all the time. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Whereas Ubuntu in African cosmology, it actually means I am because we are. I am because we are. Hence me even open up this presentation and not just talking about my credentials or my institutional affiliation, but also talking about my relationship with my family, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my dad, my grandparents, and even more importantly, my siblings, and how they inform my knowledge base. And so to understand what was going on in my undergrad experience, especially, or my first introductions to social science, and, I couldn't figure out why the campus was so white, why the professors were so white, why the research cited was so white, why the pedagogical style or how they were delivering information was so white. And I learned later on from Dr. Joyce King, and I started with this quote a lot, even before I write or when I'm doing work on culturally responsive teaching and research praxis. She talked about this term called disconscious racism. She coined the term, and she defines it as an uncritical habit of mind that lacks any ethical judgment regarding or critique of systemic racial inequity. Okay, an uncritical habit of mind that lacks any ethical judgment regarding or critique of systemic racial inequity. And I think that as qualitative researchers, when we talk about teaching qualitative research, the purpose of qualitative research, and actually conducting qualitative research, we really need to start thinking about the role of disconscious racism and the questions that we ask, who we choose to research with, and our interpretations of our observations, and even how we choose to write up the data or present our data. I think, in my opinion, based off, 15 years of, engaging in these conversations of theories of research and our investigations, how do we do what we do? Our methodological questions, is that I think qualitative researchers have gotten away with this innocence. I think for a long time, especially in my studies as a student, and even later observing as a professor of research, we have this idea that somehow qualitative research is not only innocent, but also progressive. But I think that we have this lack of critical examination of who we are as researchers, and how did we become researchers? So what was our first introductions? How were we socialized in our research endeavors, right? And so I think that's what's plaguing qualitative research as a field of study, but also as a set of practices, is that we have this uncritical habit of mind that's worth bringing up. And so sometimes when I think about this, I was talking with a group of scholars in a conversation that was hosted like this with Michigan State University. And, we were talking about the state of research, I think, in education or something to that extent. And I think people were taken aback because I was the only one who brought up this point that we can't change much with our research questions and our research pursuits and findings, simply because we failed to examine the weight of white supremacy. We failed to acknowledge the impact of European imperialism. And what I mean by that is that white supremacy in education is real. White supremacy in higher ed is real. And also, the Europeans set out to conquer. They set out to, in some cases, destroy as needed. And there was this quest for world domination of people, domination of land, and even the eradication of cultures. And in order to achieve this, Europeans had to put in place entire histories and institutions and cultural practices in order to solidify white supremacy and to establish a socio-political economic system that sustains and proliferates white supremacy. And our research theories, our research methodologies can't be separate from that. And so some of that disconnect that spiritually and culturally and epistemologically and ontologically that I was finding even in the early years, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. Even now watching, it's interesting just to see one generation behind me, they're surprised at the insurrection and the attempted coup that happened at the Capitol just last week. Like oh my God, this happened. I mean, they're literally clutching their pearls. Like, oh my God, I can't believe white people are stealing from the Capitol. They're storming the Capitol. They got zip ties. They were going to kidnap people. But that's because somewhere in our institutions, we're not even teaching the history of white rage. We're not teaching about what white supremacy looked like. And I'm not talking about just last week, I mean patterns. So people keep getting shocked And they're getting shocked because we're not telling the truth. And I say that social scientists are not innocent. We're not innocent because not only do a lot of times we participate in this pathology research, but also it's because we are failing to tell the truth. And when some of us are brave enough to speak the truth, we aren't thinking about how our research is disseminated. So right now, whether you're using Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, thank goodness for this thing called Zoom and live streaming, or even the cost of our books, our libraries are becoming more privatized. I mean, you have to pay $60, $70, $80 just to get a 20-page article, right? So how are we as social justice researchers even getting the word out to the people who need to know? And I really want to challenge all of us, right? So if you're engaged in some type of dissertation work, are you already starting to share, or are you attempting to wait until you graduate to share this information with the people who need to know, as a way of surviving this world, but also two, to tell the truth so that we can prevent more people from being harmed and our democracy from being threatened, and also transgenerational trauma that I speak of, in my research as well as today. And so I love to use this image. This is actually an archival image from the American Philosophical Society. And so this, just so we won't say that Venus is over here, preaching hate, or she's anti-qualitative researchers or anti-white. That's far from the truth. I just want to remind all of us that when we look at scientific racism, its roots are deep. So keep in mind that I've given this aspect, shared this artifact in different lectures, and I've shared it with people all the way from psychiatrists, nurses, education students, sociology students, other researchers at major universities. And there are still, researchers, social scientists who did not understand that eugenics has been rooted and grounded in nearly every aspect of society. So for example, I think it's known it was in religion, but did people know that that eugenics also infiltrated statistics? In fact, it helped, discover statistics, and that some of eugenicists helped discover or come up with these ideas of statistics. But it's also in anthropology, as you see here. It's in ethnology. It's in the law. We also can find it in sociology. So some of that discomfort, that dis-ease, that cognitive dissonance that I was feeling as a younger person, and that now still brings me some kind of angst, it's more than evident that it's a part of our, the culture of what we do. And so when you talk about bearing witness, what are people bearing witness to? People are bearing, especially my generation, we were bearing witness to mass incarceration, dehumanization projects, hyper residential segregation, unemployment, underemployment, and Negro politics. And so when you're from where I'm from, life becomes data, and data becomes praxis. It informs what we do and how we do it. And praxis becomes awareness. And awareness becomes critical consciousness. And in that critical consciousness, you begin to live differently. And that life again becomes data. And so I just wanted you all to sit with this image. And so this is what daughtering looks like. This is what we do when we bring all of ourselves to BFQI. So quickly, I'm going to read another field note as an example. So this field note is titled Telling Stories. Regina was my best friend in the 5th grade. I thought she was the prettiest, nicest, smartest, and best dressed girl that I had ever met in my entire 9 years of life. Her mother made sure that she came to school with her pigtails finely twisted, silky, and shiny. Regina had light brown eyes with light, naturally brown streaked, straightened hair that seems to match her cocoa skin. In class, Regina learned easily and quickly. She liked school, even though she came to school crying sometimes. At school, rarely did she discuss the purpose of her tears. Our favorite pastime was to complete homework together and to walk to the local library, which was on the white side of town, approximately 2 miles from our home. The white librarians hated our presence, for they thought we were too loud and rambunctious. If you all keep up the noise, we will ask you to leave. We giggled in unison quietly and slowly slipped candy out of our book bags and quickly into our mouths. There is no food or drinks in the library. You will be asked to leave. I looked at the librarian sideways and rolled my eyes. Regina and I and a few other neighborhood friends could have been the blueprint of today's Barnes and Nobles and other reading cafes. Even though we did not read at the library, but mostly socialized, for Regina and I, the library was our cerebral playground. We could not accept that reading was not to be pleasurable or a communal endeavor for us girls. Unfortunately, the librarians failed to imagine that the library offered more space, light, air conditioning, quietness, and symbols of other worlds than our homes, only 2 miles away in walking distance. We prefer to check out multiple books at once and read at home with less than a week to return the books back to their rightful place, under the watchful eye of the stern white woman who deemed herself as the guardian of the books. Reading stories and other people's scenes of a fictitious childhood and adolescent growing pains was our escape from reality. When we were not playing school or reading, our other favorite play activity was to dress and comb the hair of brown Barbie dolls. Regina liked to draw images of stylish outfits, and I liked to pretend to be her model. She designed outfits for our dolls, and I was the model of our future fashion design business. Regina and I sewed her creations together with pieces of garments by hand. The dolls and I would model our fashions with pride. All we needed to create something unique and worthy of praise back then was a sewing needle, a couple spools of black thread, old discarded materials from worn out, grown out clothes, and our collective imagination, cooperation, and validation. Imagine intellectual thought as a joyful creation comprised of the old and outgrown, threaded together and validated within Black girls' communal spaces. Now, imagine Black and brown girls and women modeling those intellectual creations publicly and privately. Aha, the artist and her intellectual creations are legit. So at this time, I'm going to actually check the time, and I have about less than 4 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. But this is actually me at another conference, that other big conference in research, and this is actually my daughter on the right. So next, the other idea of BFQI or daughtering is we have to start asking research for who, research for what, and we also should think about, ponder, how does living at the intersections of race and gender oppression make meaning out of our qualitative pursuits? And how do we decide what counts as data? And what are some of those undisclosed rituals that we partake in order to authentically interpret our data? And what happens when we analyze the small print, the footnotes, and that data that actually ended up on the cutting floor? And how might, as I tried to demonstrate in just an hour, how might an Africana unconscious educe critical qualitative processes and performances. I'm going to skip through that part. And so I'll end with that the challenge that we face is qualitative inquiries, using the language where I come from. Qualitative researchers have been two-faced. Okay, meaning that we say that we're progressive while at the same time ignoring and marginalizing the real concerns of the people. And so we're commodifying our qualitative pursuits while also saying that we are more accessible than those other people and researchers. And also what we call on the South Side, qualitative researchers, they double-handed. Double-handed and two-faces are probably the two worst things you can be in the Black community. Meaning that they can't use their tools to bring about liberation, freedom, joy, etc., if it's not done in community. Okay, so I'm going to leave this image just in case anybody wanted more, to talk more about this epistemic violence that I'm attempting to uncover in qualitative inquiry and all inquiry. I don't just want to talk about, qualitative inquiry as something bad, because it can be very, very good, when we figure out how to use it for social political purposes in real time. And so the epistemic violence that occurs specifically in qualitative research that we're up against is this outsider within, meaning we do have Black, Indigenous, and other women of color who are still being marginalized within qualitative inquiry itself. So you can find us writing qualitative text, publishing articles in qualitative research, and even offering up new theories. But who's actually teaching qualitative research? Who's actually doing the teaching and passing it on to the next generation? Also, we're experiencing epistemic apartheid. Who are we citing? So for example, you may have noticed in this presentation, I very rarely cite any scholars because most of us have forgotten those Black and Indigenous men and women whom have informed, our cultural knowledge, our research. Even in the BFQI book, I'm very, very careful about who's being cited because I have to do extra labor to go find those voices and those people. So how do we interrupt epistemic apartheid, racial and gender apartheid in qualitative inquiry? And also we're seeing this commodification of our stories. I sometimes cringe because I have cousins and great aunts and other people who are part of my community who may not even be able to afford some of my work. I try to make it affordable, I try to negotiate it, but many of us keep our work behind paywalls. And many of us are getting paid. Even my first book, Teaching Black Girls, which is an ethnography, I'm still getting paid off of that study that occurred back in, 2005? How many years ago was that? 15 years ago at least. And the girls aren't getting paid who were part of that study. So that's what I mean by the commodification of stories. Many of those girls don't even have access to libraries in their communities. And also many of us Black and other Indigenous scholars, we're also victims, all of us, of intellectual servitude. I mean, that's when we're always trying to get that next publication. We're always trying to get tenure track. We're always teaching other people's children before we can even teach children who are a part of our own communities. And I mean white, middle-class college students. And so I say all that to say that this epistemic violence has real life consequences. It makes us complicit in alienation and inferiorization, deculturalization, and dehumanization practices that are occurring across this country, right? And so how do we shift? We shift by, participating in qualitative research as sort of a rite of passage. What if we imagine qualitative inquiry as a rite of passage, this recovering of our Indigenous cultures, this preserving of our diverse ways of life across contexts and communities? And what if we made qualitative research more, giving it back to its Indigenous roots of rituals, and then we make meaning out of that? And so finally, in closing, that is my daughter on the left-hand side again. grown up, and that's one of my daughters in Ghana, in a village in Ghana. And the kids like when I take pictures of them, and so I was using my camera to take a picture of the two girls as we were in the market, spending time in the market. Okay, so I'll open up for questions at this time, if that's okay, Ron. I think it's time.
Oh, sure, sure. We have some time to do that. And there was a couple of chats down below that came in earlier, but yeah, we have plenty of time. With the next slot doesn't till 10:15 in that. So sure, what people can post through the chat mode. Well, while they're waiting to do that, I thank you so much. Looking at this conference and looking at, in the best thing about the critical approach is you not only look what's there, but you look at what's not there, and who's there and who's not there. And looking over the history of the conference, there certainly was a pattern in terms of who was giving the plenaries and who was giving the keynotes. And so we've gone the science stuff, we've gone the art stuff, we've gone different ways, but there were just voices missing. And what I loved about your presentation today, very challenging, but I felt comfortable too. I mean, in the sense that you acknowledge that we all have these challenges. And I felt very inclusive. The way that you presented it today, you got a lot of hard things across and a lot of things of not just being aware, but we got to do different. But the style, the way that you did that today, it was just remarkable, and it's everything that I hope for as far as setting the tone for the conference. What I'm going to talk about, here's my plug. What I'm talking about on Thursday are some things that just looking at what you show on your website and what you don't show on your website, the images that you show and don't show, send messages and that you never intended. I always say we make errors of exuberance and deficiencies, and where these things go. And one of the things is just the language. We are like, every once in a while we publish something in Spanish, but it looks like we don't say we're English only, but that's really all our pages are, and we're giving a message about that. And so I've learned a lot from your work, and I've learned even more today. And it looks like we have some folks that are chatting down below.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, I also had the opportunity, of course, to visit the website, and I think that you all did a remarkable job. These next few days and having representation and very strong critical voices. So yes, thank you for that. And I felt very comfortable participating and having this conversation today. Okay, so do we open up now for questions in the chat? Or should I read through the chat? Adam, do we facilitate? I didn't know if there was a moderator.
There was one earlier that Johnny Saldana posted.
Oh.
I can read that. He was talking about the arts and eugenics. He says, I do not see the arts and the eugenics roots. We in the arts today feel that the arts are open to everyone and its disciplines look deeply at the human condition, generating more empathy for others. So he had posted that just a few minutes ago.
Yes. Hi, Johnny. Johnny is a comrade. So Johnny, I'm just going to beg to defer. I do think that the arts also have been complicit in scientific racism or eugenicism. It might not be listed as much, but even if you think about, let's take anthropology, right? Or let's take also architecture, right? That's there. So believe it or not, we even see with some of the monuments in DC, such as the White House, and their history of who can enter in what spaces, who actually built the facilities, right? Or even what's considered to be aesthetically pleasing. And that's what I meant by walking on on the campus where I went to undergrad and graduate school. And Johnny, I know you've been there at UIUC, and I think many of us were taken aback that we're still looking at these European statues, these images on the wall, and even the way that that space was set up for conferencing. And I'm sure you recall that, because I think we had some of those conversations too. So that is all a part of the arts or representation of the arts, but it's also, the arts has definitely been complicit. So even if you think about media and pop culture, how are Black people depicted or not? I think the most famous situation was how uh, Serena Williams was, painted after that one tennis match where they made her into a cartoon character, or even former First Lady Michelle Obama and how she was depicted, as a cartoon character who was militant and things like that. So I disagree, but I do understand as someone who even works in the area of trauma and healing, the arts such as theater, dance, etc., can be used to heal. In fact, we encourage many of our clients who have been traumatized to participate in some forms of theater or even dance.
I think that's a new book of yours, The Avocation of Architecture. I think that would be really good.
I'm gonna need your help with that one, Ryan.
Yeah. Let's see. Another one says, you mentioned that qualitative researchers publish and make money off the work with research participants, but participants do not get paid. Is that ethical?
Interestingly enough, I don't see that question in the chat, but interestingly enough, that's one of the conversations that some of us who have critical leanings, radical leanings, we have been asking. So for me, in fact, we have a book that's forthcoming like any day now, Intersectionality and Qualitative Research, myself and Jennifer Esposito out of Georgia State University, and we're raising that question. Now, keep in mind, intellectual labor it should be, rewarded in many ways, but also we do have an ethics problem in institutional research, and that many of us will continue to prosper in one way or another from our research with people. I think I gave the best example. I collected data as a graduate student, and I still get, my books are still selling from that original study, but the girls who are now women that I work with, I don't see them again at all, I don't think, and they don't get any compensation. But also, we have this may or may not necessarily relate to say Black people or other indigenous people, but for sure we have many white researchers who go into communities of color, and not only do they get a dissertation out of their work, but they get speaking engagements, they acquire tenure, they get promoted to full professor, and and so it goes on and on and on. I mean, we have some scholars who make tens of thousands of dollars doing 20-30 minute keynotes. And when you look at not only the gender and racial segregation in our research institutions, but also when you look at who's tenured and promoted, so that's not even equal. So yeah, it might be an ethical issue. No, it's not that it might. It is an ethical issue. Let me just say it plainly. But I think it's a complicated ethical issue. The question is, how can we become more? How can we become in our pursuits, our qualitative pursuits, more just? I don't think that'll be a finite end. We just have to be more conscientious. Or as some people have actually stopped researching the other. And that's why it's these calls for, if I'm going to do any interrogations, it will be of the self.
Yeah, what I really like that there's that wonderful reflective loop. It's sort of like the old cross-cultural thing. Oh, how strange of that, and whoa, how strange that I'm not doing that. And when we look at criticism, whether it's Slumdog Millionaire, When We Leave, or the coffee table books and those sorts of things, we don't have to look too far when we turn it back onto ourselves and go, oh, me too, and I think that's what's the wonderful I think it's really the freedom. We all talk about the self of the researcher, but that's so scientific and also clinical. We have a clinical background too. And the idea of saying, what you do and what you don't do. Remember Bateson talked about the probe, and it's back into us too. And just keep continually remind ourselves of that. And so I think about then, how is that written? How do we report? Because we're carrying something. To port something is to carry something, and we're recarrying it. And the directionality of just taking, and what are we giving back? And it really raises wonderful questions to that. And the commodification that really resonated with a number of the folks today, and so the sadness about the Zoom is what normally happens at the conference is that the community kicks in. and we continue to kind of hang with each other and break bread with each other and talk and continue the conversation. So I want to encourage everybody to, you can reach out to Venus and continue the conversation and how we can continue going. Please let us know when the new book comes out. We'd love to offer it for folks to review and to publish at TQR for that, because we really, really thank you so much for today. Adam is telling me now you got to do that transition thing, Ron. See, it's Adam's world. I just live in it from time to time, and he's telling me what to do. Thank you today. What a wonderful presentation. So enriching, so provocative, evocative, and really what we need to be doing and raising that. And I thank everybody for participating today. In just a few moments, we're going to go into the breakout session A. Remember, each room has its own Zoom. You click on and in you go. And again, thank you so much. I mean, she really have kicked things off the perfect way. And we're just so thankful that you're here today. And even though it was a little bit earlier for you, it was fine. And I think you were more awake than I was when it started.
Well, thank you, Ron, again for the invitation. And I want to thank the participants for all the questions in the chats and the comments. I did read them all. You all can find me on Twitter. We can continue the conversation. And thank you, Adam, for dealing with my the Zoom diva. That's what we can call me for now.
Not at all. Thank you for we appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.